Stay with me, because before the candles burned out that night, a single locked door would expose a secret worth millions of dollars. The lock clicked. Sharp. Metallic. Final. Grace Caldwell stood motionless in the dim basement as the sound echoed through the concrete walls. For a moment she stared at the door, expecting it to open again. It did not. Above her, distant music drifted through the ceiling. A jazz band was playing. Guests were laughing. Glasses touched. Somewhere upstairs, more than 200 people were celebrating Ethan Caldwell's 40th birthday. Grace placed a hand over her pregnant belly and forced a smile. Ethan had told her it was part of a surprise. He had kissed her forehead before leading her downstairs. He had asked her to wait a few minutes while he prepared something special. At least that was what he said. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 20. The smile slowly disappeared from her face. The basement felt colder than she remembered. Old wooden shelves lined the walls. Cardboard boxes sat stacked in neat rows. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long shadows across the floor. Grace walked to the door and tested the handle. Locked. She frowned. "Ethan," she called. Her voice echoed through the room. No answer came back. Upstairs, applause erupted. Grace checked her phone. No signal. The basement sat beneath layers of concrete and stone, leaving her isolated from the rest of the mansion. She tried again. Nothing. The battery icon reflected in her eyes as she lowered the phone. A strange feeling settled in her chest. Not fear. Not yet. Just uncertainty. The kind that arrives before a storm. Above her, guests gathered beneath crystal chandeliers imported from Europe. Servers carried silver trays loaded with champagne. Business executives mingled with politicians. Local reporters photographed the enormous birthday cake standing in the center of the ballroom. Ethan Caldwell smiled for every camera. He shook hands. Accepted congratulations. Raised glasses. To everyone watching, he looked like a man enjoying the perfect evening. But if anyone had paid close attention, they would have noticed something unusual. Every few minutes, Ethan glanced toward the antique grandfather clock standing beside the ballroom entrance. Then he checked his watch. Then he checked the clock again. It happened once. Then twice. Then 5 times. The pattern never stopped. One person noticed. Rose Bennett. Rose had worked for the Caldwell family for nearly a decade. She knew the difference between celebration and distraction. Tonight, Ethan looked distracted. Very distracted. Grace sat on an old wooden chair and listened to the sounds above her. Laughter. Music. Applause. The world continued without her. She rubbed her stomach gently. "Just a few more minutes," she whispered. The baby shifted slightly beneath her hand. She smiled. Then something caught her attention. Tick, tick, tick. Grace turned her head. A dusty wall clock hung near the far corner of the basement. The second hand moved steadily forward. Tick, tick, tick. The sound seemed louder than before. More noticeable. Almost deliberate. She stared at it for several seconds. Then she realized something strange. The clock had stopped years ago, yet somehow the second hand was moving. Grace slowly stood. Her pulse quickened. Somewhere beyond the shelves and storage boxes, hidden in the shadows of the basement, something else was running. Something else was counting down. Grace walked toward the corner of the basement, unable to take her eyes off the old wall clock. Dust covered its wooden frame. The glass was slightly cracked. Everything about it suggested it had been forgotten years ago. Yet the second hand continued moving with perfect precision. Tick, tick, tick. The sound echoed softly through the room. Grace reached out and touched the side of the clock. The wood felt cold beneath her fingertips. Then she noticed something even stranger. There was no power cord, no visible battery compartment, nothing that should have allowed it to function. Her pulse quickened. She stepped back and studied the wall more carefully. The clock was mounted slightly unevenly, not enough for most people to notice. But now that she was looking closely, it seemed almost intentional, as if someone had moved it recently. Upstairs, laughter filled the ballroom. Guests gathered around towering flower arrangements, while photographers captured images of smiling executives and local celebrities. Ethan Caldwell stood near the center of the room beside the massive birthday cake. To everyone around him, he appeared relaxed and successful. Yet Rose Bennett continued noticing the same pattern. Every few minutes, his eyes drifted toward the grandfather clock beside the ballroom entrance. Then he checked his watch. Then he looked toward the west wing of the mansion. The behavior was subtle, but impossible to ignore once seen. Rose had spent enough years serving wealthy families to understand that people often revealed their secrets through habits. Tonight, Ethan seemed to be waiting for something. Back downstairs, Grace carefully pushed against the side of the wall clock. Nothing happened. She tried again. Still nothing. Then she placed both hands on the wooden frame and shifted it slightly to the left. A faint click sounded behind the wall. Grace froze. For several seconds, she did not move. Her heart pounded louder than the ticking clock. Slowly, she pushed again. This time a narrow gap appeared between two sections of the wall. Grace stared in disbelief. Hidden behind the clock was a small access panel. She stepped closer. Cool air drifted through the opening. Somewhere beyond it, machinery hummed quietly. The sound explained the ticking. Whatever existed behind the wall was still operating. She widened the gap enough to look inside. Darkness greeted her at first. Then she spotted a faint line of light farther away. It looked like part of another corridor, a hidden space beneath the mansion. Grace swallowed hard. Questions rushed through her mind. Why would anyone build a concealed passage below the house? Why had Ethan never mentioned it? And why was she suddenly beginning to feel that none of this was connected to a birthday surprise? Above her, a waiter accidentally dropped a spoon onto a marble floor. The sharp metallic sound echoed through the ballroom. Ethan turned immediately. His reaction was so sudden that several nearby guests glanced toward him. Within seconds, he recovered and smiled again, but Rose noticed. She noticed everything. Meanwhile, Grace carefully squeezed through the narrow opening and entered the hidden corridor. The air smelled cleaner there, newer. Unlike the dusty basement she had left behind, this passage showed signs of recent use. Small recessed lights lined the ceiling. Electrical cables ran neatly along one wall. Someone had invested money into this place. A lot of money. Grace followed the corridor slowly, one hand brushing the wall for balance. After about 30 feet, she stopped. Ahead of her stood a heavy metal door with a digital keypad glowing faintly in the darkness. And from somewhere beyond that door came the sound of a human voice. Grace stopped breathing for a moment. The voice beyond the metal door was faint, distorted by distance and steel, yet unmistakably human. She stepped closer and pressed her ear against the cold surface. Silence followed. Then came the sound again. Not a cry, not a shout, just a voice speaking softly enough to raise more questions than answers. Grace glanced at the keypad mounted beside the door. A small green light pulsed steadily in the darkness. Whoever designed this hidden corridor had invested serious money into it. Nothing about this place looked old. Nothing looked forgotten. The lights were modern. The wiring was new. Even the metal door appeared recently installed. She swallowed hard. "Hello," she called. Her voice echoed down the corridor. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a faint scraping sound came from the other side. "Who is there?" the voice asked. The words were weak but clear. Grace felt a chill travel through her chest. "My name is Grace," she replied. "Who are you?" Another pause followed, long enough to make her wonder if the connection had been lost through the thick door. Then the answer finally came. "Thomas Walker." Upstairs, the birthday celebration continued beneath glowing chandeliers. Guests filled the ballroom, while servers delivered desserts and champagne. A live jazz trio played near the grand staircase. To anyone entering the room, the evening appeared flawless. Ethan Caldwell stood near the center of it all, smiling for photographs and accepting congratulations. Yet Rose Bennett noticed the same thing she had been noticing for hours. Ethan never stopped watching the time. Every few minutes his gaze shifted toward the grandfather clock, then toward his wristwatch, then toward the West Wing. The pattern continued like clockwork. Rose quietly carried a tray through the crowd while observing him. The longer she watched, the less comfortable she became. Back below the mansion, Grace remained beside the door. "Thomas," she said carefully, "what are you doing down there?" A dry laugh escaped from the other side. It was not the laugh of someone amused. It sounded like the laugh of someone exhausted. "That is a complicated question." Grace frowned. "Do you know Ethan?" Silence. Then another scrape. "Yes." The answer arrived immediately. "I know Ethan Caldwell." Grace felt her pulse quicken. "How?" Another pause. "I used to work for him." Grace stepped back from the door. Her thoughts raced. Ethan owned dozens of companies and employed thousands of people. That alone did not mean anything. Yet something in Thomas's voice felt different. He sounded frightened. Not angry. Not bitter. Frightened. "Why are you here?" she asked. This time the silence lasted longer. Upstairs, applause erupted as someone proposed a toast to Ethan's success. Down below, the hidden corridor remained eerily quiet. Finally, Thomas spoke again. Because I discovered something I was never supposed to discover. Grace stared at the keypad. The green light continued blinking. Steady, unchanging. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach. The baby shifted gently beneath her palm. What did you discover? She asked. Thomas exhaled slowly. Money. Grace almost laughed. Money. Not ordinary money. His voice lowered. Enough money to destroy lives. At that exact moment, somewhere above them, a grandfather clock struck 11. One deep chime rolled through the mansion. Then another. Then another. Ethan looked toward the sound immediately. Rose noticed. And for the first time that night, she began to wonder where Grace had disappeared to. Grace remained beside the metal door, staring at the keypad while questions crowded her mind. Thomas Walker knew Ethan. Thomas claimed he had discovered something worth enough money to destroy lives. And somehow he was hidden behind a reinforced door beneath a mansion that should never have contained secret corridors in the first place. The deeper Grace looked, the less her world made sense. Thomas, she said carefully, how long have you been down there? A long silence followed. She could hear the faint hum of electronics somewhere beyond the door. Then came his answer. Long enough to realize nobody was supposed to find me. Grace felt her stomach tighten. What does that mean? Another pause. It means someone wanted this place forgotten. Upstairs, the celebration continued. Crystal glasses reflected warm golden light across the ballroom. The birthday cake stood nearly 6 feet tall beneath a display of fresh white roses. Guests gathered in small groups discussing business deals, luxury vacations, and investment opportunities. Yet Rose Bennett could no longer focus on any of it. She had searched the main floor twice. She had checked the terrace overlooking the ocean. She had even looked through the private family rooms. Grace was nowhere. That alone was unusual. Grace never disappeared without telling someone. Especially not tonight. Rose carried a tray through the ballroom and noticed Ethan glance at his watch again. 11:12. Less than 30 seconds later, he checked it once more. His smile remained flawless. His posture remained relaxed. But his eyes told a different story. He looked like a man waiting for a specific moment. Down in the hidden corridor, Grace leaned closer to the door. If you know something about Ethan, tell me. The response came immediately. Not through this door. Grace frowned. Why not? Because if you are standing where I think you are standing, there are cameras. Her eyes widened. Instinctively, she looked up. The corridor seemed empty. Then she spotted it. A tiny black lens mounted near one of the recessed lights. Almost invisible unless someone knew where to look. A chill traveled through her body. Thomas was right. Someone was watching. Or at least someone had planned to watch. Grace stepped backward. The discovery changed everything. This was not an abandoned area. It was an active system. A functioning hidden facility beneath her own home. Thomas, she whispered, lowering her voice. What exactly did you find? This time the answer came in pieces. Financial records. Property transfers. Private accounts. Grace listened carefully. Whose accounts? Silence lingered for several seconds. Then Thomas finally answered. Ethan's. Upstairs, applause suddenly erupted. Ethan had stepped onto a small stage near the center of the ballroom. Guests gathered around him while photographers prepared their cameras. Another birthday speech was about to begin. Rose watched from the edge of the crowd. Something about the timing bothered her. Ethan looked relieved. Not happy. Relieved. As though a difficult part of the evening was almost over. Down below, Grace stared at the camera hidden in the corridor ceiling. Her pulse continued accelerating. Every answer Thomas provided led to a more troubling question. If Ethan had nothing to hide, why build a secret archive beneath the mansion? Why monitor it with cameras? Why leave her locked downstairs while the party continued above? Then a faint mechanical sound echoed from somewhere deeper inside the wall beyond the door. Thomas reacted immediately. Someone just accessed the system. Grace froze. What system? The archive. His voice grew tense. Grace, listen carefully. If Ethan realizes you found this corridor, everything changes. Before she could ask another question, a small green indicator suddenly appeared on the keypad. The screen lit up. For numbers flashed briefly across the display, then disappeared. Someone, somewhere inside the mansion, had just remotely connected to the hidden door. Grace stared at the glowing keypad. The numbers had appeared for less than a second, Yet the message was unmistakable. Someone was connected to the system. Somewhere above them, hidden behind the music and celebration, a person was monitoring what happened beneath the mansion. Her pulse quickened. "Thomas," she whispered, "can they see me?" A brief silence followed. Then his voice returned through the metal door. "If the cameras are still active, yes." Grace instinctively stepped backward until she was partially hidden by the corner of the corridor. The tiny camera above remained fixed in place, its dark lens impossible to read. She suddenly felt exposed. Every question she had asked, every movement she had made, someone could have been watching all of it. Upstairs, Ethan Caldwell accepted another round of applause. Guests smiled as he thanked investors, friends, and business partners for attending the celebration. The ballroom glowed with warmth and luxury. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors. Yet beneath the practiced smile, Ethan's attention drifted again. He glanced toward his watch. 11:21. Then he looked briefly toward the West Wing before returning to his speech. Rose Bennett noticed immediately. The feeling in her stomach had grown worse. Grace was still missing. Ethan seemed distracted, and every instinct told her the two things were connected. She quietly stepped away from the crowd and headed toward the service hallway. Meanwhile, below the mansion, Grace remained focused on the keypad. The screen suddenly flashed again. This time a small line of text appeared. "Access log updated." Then it disappeared. Grace frowned. "What does that mean?" she asked. "Someone entered the archive system," Thomas replied. "The archive records every access attempt." Grace looked at the door. "Can you open it?" A soft laugh came from the other side. "If I could open it, I would not still be here." Before Grace could respond, she heard another sound. A mechanical click somewhere inside the wall. Then a second click. The hidden corridor seemed to come alive around her. Small indicator lights illuminated near the floor. Ventilation fans quietly activated. It felt as though an entire hidden facility was waking up. Thomas spoke again, his voice noticeably more urgent. "Listen carefully. If somebody accessed the system remotely, they may be checking whether the archive has been discovered." Grace swallowed hard. What is inside this archive? This time the answer came without hesitation. Financial records, trust documents, property transfers, everything. Grace froze. "Trust documents?" "Yes." Thomas lowered his voice. "Including one connected to your child." For a moment the world seemed to stop. Grace pressed her hand against her stomach. "My child. That is why you need to find a way inside." Her heartbeat accelerated. She had known her grandfather left a family trust years ago, but Ethan always handled the details. Whenever she asked questions, he assured her everything was under control. She never imagined those documents might be hidden beneath their own home. Upstairs, Rose reached the security office near the rear corridor. The room was empty. Rows of monitors displayed live camera feeds from throughout the property. She scanned screen after screen. Ballroom, terrace, driveway, kitchen. Then one monitor caught her attention. It showed Ethan entering the basement with Grace earlier that evening. Rose leaned closer. She watched the footage carefully. Two people went downstairs. Only one returned. The color drained from her face. She replayed the footage. Then again. The result never changed. Ethan came back alone. Down below, Grace stared at the metal door while Thomas waited on the other side. Somewhere above them, the party continued. Somewhere else, someone watched through hidden cameras. And for the first time that night, Grace began to suspect that the birthday celebration upstairs might have been designed to distract everyone from what was really happening beneath the mansion. Rose stared at the security monitor while her heart pounded in her chest. She replayed the footage again. 7:14. Ethan and Grace entered the basement together. 7:16. Ethan returned alone. The screen showed every second with perfect clarity. There was no alternate staircase. No hidden exit visible from the camera angle. Grace had never come back upstairs. Rose leaned closer to the monitor. Then she noticed something else. At exactly 7:17, another camera feed briefly flickered. The image disappeared for less than 2 seconds before returning. Most people would never have noticed it. Rose did. Years of working inside the mansion had taught her to pay attention to details. She quickly opened the system logs. A single entry appeared during the interruption. Restricted access granted. Location, lower archive sector. Rose frowned. She had never heard of a lower archive sector. The mansion blueprints she knew contained no such area. Meanwhile, deep beneath the house, Grace remained beside the metal door. The words Thomas had spoken continued echoing in her mind. A trust connected to her child. Hidden documents. Secret accounts. None of it felt real. "Tell me everything," she whispered. Thomas hesitated. Then he answered, "Your grandfather created a protected trust years ago. Most of the assets remain inaccessible until the child is born." Grace closed her eyes. She remembered conversations from years earlier. Family attorneys. Estate planning meetings. Documents she barely glanced at because she trusted the people around her. Especially Ethan. "How much money are we talking about?" she asked. A long silence followed. More than enough to save a collapsing empire. Grace felt the air leave her lungs. Upstairs, Ethan finished another toast and stepped away from the crowd. Several guests tried to stop him for photographs, but he politely excused himself. His smile remained calm. His movements remained controlled. Yet the moment he reached a quieter hallway, the smile vanished. He checked his phone. No messages. Then he checked it again. Something was beginning to bother him. Down below, a faint electronic tone suddenly echoed through the corridor. The keypad screen illuminated once more. This time several lines of information appeared. User access history. Security clearance records. Recent entries. Grace stared at the display. One name appeared repeatedly throughout the past 6 months. Ethan Caldwell. Another appeared only once. Thomas Walker. Then she noticed a third entry dated earlier that evening. Access granted. Ethan Caldwell. 7:16 p.m. The exact moment he returned upstairs alone. Grace felt her stomach tighten. "Thomas," she said quietly. "He came here tonight." "I know," Thomas replied. "I heard the door." "Why?" Thomas exhaled slowly. "To make sure everything stayed hidden." Before Grace could respond, another sound echoed through the corridor. Footsteps. Not from behind the metal door. From somewhere behind her. She spun around immediately. The corridor remained empty. Yet the sound came again. Soft. Careful. Growing closer. Upstairs, Rose copied the security logs onto a flash drive. Every instinct told her she needed proof before confronting anyone. Then she noticed movement on one of the monitors. Ethan was walking toward the west wing. Toward the basement entrance. Rose froze. He was heading directly toward the area where Grace had disappeared. Without hesitation, she grabbed the flash drive and rushed out of the security office. Beneath the mansion, Grace listened as the footsteps continued approaching through the hidden passage. Her pulse raced. Thomas heard them too. "Grace," he said urgently. "Someone is coming." The corridor lights reflected against the metal door as the sound drew nearer. One step, then another. And for the first time that night, Grace realized she might only have minutes left before the person who built the secret archive discovered she had found it. Grace pressed herself against the wall as the footsteps drew closer through the hidden corridor. Each sound echoed through the narrow passage. Slow, deliberate, getting nearer with every second. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Thomas," she whispered. "What do I do?" The answer came immediately. "Stay calm. Listen first." The footsteps continued, then suddenly stopped. Silence filled the corridor. Grace held her breath. For several seconds nothing happened. Then a familiar voice spoke from the darkness behind her. "Mrs. Caldwell." Relief flooded through her body. "Rose." A flashlight beam appeared around the corner. Moments later, Rose Bennett stepped into view, breathing hard from rushing through the mansion. Grace nearly laughed from relief. "Thank God." Rose quickly lowered her voice. "We do not have much time." She held up the flash drive taken from the security office. "I found footage." Grace immediately understood. "The basement cameras?" Rose nodded. "I saw Ethan bring you downstairs." The corridor seemed even colder after hearing the words spoken aloud. Rose glanced toward the metal door. "Is someone behind that?" "His name is Thomas Walker," Grace said. "He worked for Ethan." Rose looked stunned. "There is actually someone in there?" "Yes." Thomas spoke through the door before either woman could continue. "Rose, if that is really you, check the keypad." Rose stepped closer. The screen still glowed faintly. Several access logs remained visible. She scanned them carefully. Then her eyes widened. "There is an override sequence." Grace moved beside her. "Can it open the door?" Rose entered several commands from the security notes she had found earlier. For a moment nothing happened. Then a green light appeared. A mechanical lock disengaged somewhere inside the wall. The heavy door slowly opened. Cool air drifted into the corridor. Beyond it sat a room unlike anything either woman expected. Rows of filing cabinets stretched across the space. Computer monitors glowed softly. Shelves held dozens of labeled storage boxes. It looked less like a hidden room and more like a private financial archive. Then Grace saw Thomas Walker. He sat near a desk covered with documents. Tired, unshaven, exhausted, but very real. For a moment, nobody spoke. Finally, Thomas stood and walked toward them. "You found it." Grace looked around the room in disbelief. "What is all this?" Thomas opened a nearby cabinet and removed several thick folders. "Proof." He placed them on the desk. "Property transfers, corporate records, trust agreements, account statements." Every folder carried the Caldwell name somewhere inside. Rose opened another drawer. More files, more records, hundreds of pages organized with meticulous precision. Then Grace noticed a folder labeled Family Trust. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The first page contained her name. The second contained Ethan's. The third contained the name of her unborn child. She stared at the numbers printed across the documents. Tens of millions of dollars. Protected assets. Future distributions. Legal transfer schedules. "This cannot be right," she whispered. Thomas nodded slowly. "It is." Grace looked up. "Why hide this?" Thomas pointed toward another folder. "Because Ethan's companies have been losing money for nearly 2 years." Rose opened the folder and scanned the first few pages. Her expression changed immediately. Debt reports, refinancing agreements, emergency funding requests. The pieces suddenly began fitting together. Grace felt the room tilt around her. Upstairs, the birthday party continued beneath crystal chandeliers. Guests laughed. Music played. Champagne flowed. But beneath their feet, hidden behind concrete walls and locked doors, the truth was finally beginning to emerge. And for the first time that night, Grace understood that Ethan had not been protecting a secret. He had been protecting a collapsing empire. Grace stared at the documents spread across the desk, while the quiet hum of computer servers filled the hidden archive. Every page confirmed the same truth. The trust established for her unborn child was not simply a family inheritance. It was the financial foundation Ethan had been trying desperately to reach. Years of transactions, shell companies, refinancing agreements, and emergency funding requests painted a picture very different from the successful image he presented to the world upstairs. Rose copied files onto multiple storage drives while Thomas organized folders into boxes. Nobody wasted time. Every minute mattered now. "How much does Ethan know?" Grace asked. Thomas looked toward one of the glowing monitors. "If he checked the system logs, he already knows someone accessed the archive." Rose glanced up immediately. "Then we need to leave." Thomas nodded. "And we need proof that cannot disappear." Grace walked toward the nearest computer and examined the records displayed on the screen. Names, dates, transfers, legal agreements. Everything connected back to the trust. Then she noticed a folder labeled Future Distribution Schedule. Her pulse quickened. She opened it. The document explained exactly how the assets would be transferred after the birth of her child. Control of a significant portion would move automatically into a protected structure that Ethan could not access directly. Suddenly, the entire puzzle came together. The missing money, the secret archive, the hidden corridor, the unusual behavior, the constant attention to timing. It was all connected. Upstairs, the birthday party continued beneath crystal chandeliers. Guests laughed while servers cleared dessert plates. A jazz melody drifted through the ballroom. Yet the atmosphere had begun to shift. Several people noticed Ethan checking his phone repeatedly. Others noticed him stepping away from conversations more often than before. The perfect host appeared distracted. Beneath the mansion, Grace closed the document and looked at Thomas. "I am not running." Rose stopped copying files and stared at her. "What?" Grace took a slow breath. "If we leave quietly, he controls the story. He explains everything. He decides what people believe." Thomas studied her expression. "What are you planning?" Grace looked at the boxes filled with evidence. "I am going upstairs." Silence filled the room. Then Rose slowly smiled. Not because the situation was safe. Because it was the first moment all night that Grace sounded completely certain. Together they gathered the documents. Financial records, trust agreements, security logs, access histories, digital backups. Everything. Thomas disconnected several storage drives from the archive system and handed them to Rose. Keep copies separate, he said. If one disappears, another survives. Minutes later, the group moved through the hidden corridor toward the basement entrance. Every step felt heavier than the last. Above them waited hundreds of people who believed they were attending a birthday celebration. None of them knew a second story had been unfolding beneath their feet. As they reached the basement stairs, Grace paused. Music filtered faintly through the ceiling. Laughter followed. The contrast felt surreal. She had entered the basement believing she was part of a surprise. She was leaving with evidence capable of changing lives. Upstairs, Ethan finally received the notification he had been dreading. Unauthorized archive activity detected. The message flashed across his phone screen. For the first time that evening, genuine alarm crossed his face. He immediately looked toward the west wing. The smile disappeared. The calm vanished. Around him, guests continued talking, unaware of the shift. Ethan turned and began moving through the crowd. Fast, purposeful, directly toward the basement entrance. At that exact moment, Grace opened the door leading back into the mansion. She tightened her grip on the box of evidence, looked toward the brightly lit ballroom ahead, and started walking toward the celebration that was about to become something very different. Grace stepped into the ballroom carrying the box of documents while Rose and Thomas followed close behind. The music faltered. Conversations slowed. One by one, guests turned toward the unexpected sight. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across the room as hundreds of eyes settled on the woman everyone believed was resting upstairs. Grace walked forward calmly, one hand supporting the box and the other resting gently over her stomach. At the far end of the ballroom, Ethan stopped in his tracks. For a brief moment, neither moved. The distance between them felt larger than the entire mansion. Around them, executives, investors, attorneys, reporters, and family friends exchanged confused glances. Ethan recovered first. A practiced smile returned to his face. "Grace," he said warmly, "everyone has been asking about you." The words sounded polished, familiar, almost convincing. But not tonight. Grace placed the box on a nearby table. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom. Rose connected one of the storage drives to the large presentation screen that had displayed birthday tributes earlier in the evening. Seconds later, documents appeared across the screen. Property records, financial statements, trust agreements, security logs. A ripple moved through the crowd. People stepped closer. Conversations became whispers. Then the whispers became questions. Ethan's smile faded. Thomas walked forward and placed several folders beside the box. "Everything is there," he said quietly. "Every transfer, every record." More files appeared on the screen. Dates, signatures, corporate entities, funding requests, the hidden archive beneath the mansion, the access logs, the records connected to the trust established for Grace's child. Nobody shouted. Nobody needed to. The evidence spoke for itself. Guests who had arrived expecting a celebration now found themselves studying documents. Several attorneys in attendance began examining the records with growing concern. A few investors quietly stepped away to make phone calls. Even the reporters who had come to cover a birthday gala suddenly discovered a much bigger story. Ethan looked around the ballroom and finally understood something. The room had changed. These were no longer guests. They were witnesses. Grace took a slow breath. Months of confusion suddenly felt clear. "I trusted you," she said. Her voice remained steady. "And I trusted the future we were building." Silence followed. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Ethan opened his mouth as though preparing an explanation, but no words came. Across the room, the enormous birthday cake remained untouched beneath the chandeliers. Its candles had melted into small pools of wax. The symbol of the evening had quietly transformed from celebration into something else entirely. The hours that followed changed many lives. Independent reviews began. Financial records were examined. Questions that had remained hidden for years finally reached daylight. The documents from the archive could not be ignored. The truth had left the basement. 1 year later, spring sunlight filtered through the trees of a peaceful public park. Grace sat on a wooden bench holding her healthy baby while a gentle breeze moved through the branches above. Children laughed nearby. Dogs chased tennis balls across the grass. The world felt remarkably simple. Rose visited often. Thomas had rebuilt his life and returned to work with a reputation restored. The hidden archive no longer belonged to shadows and locked doors. It belonged to the truth. Grace looked down at her child and smiled softly. In the distance, the city skyline shimmered beneath a bright blue sky. She thought about the birthday party, the locked basement, the secret corridor, the clock that had been counting down all along. Then she kissed the top of her baby's head and stood. Some people spend years building walls around the truth, but the truth only needs one door to open.